Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this post-film discussion after The Ground Between Us. We're here with the co-directors, Zeppelin and Galen. Please say hello.
Hey
Hello.
everyone, I'm Zeppelin, and I'm so excited that you were able to watch The Ground Between Us this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Excellent, excellent. Let's just start off with a kind of something easy here.
Post-film discussion after The Ground Between Us. We're here with the
Why don't you both tell us a little about yourself and what motivated you to make this film?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Michigan and came out to Salt Lake City to go to college. And I think what really motivated me to make this film was there was so much going on in terms of public lands on both sides of the political spectrum before the election. There was the Malheur Wildlife Refuge takeover in Oregon, where some activists took over a wildlife refuge for 40 days and had an armed standoff with the FBI over grazing rights. And then there was some actions on the left that also led to a few people being imprisoned. And I recognized how sensitive this issue was and how Utah was really ground zero for a lot of it. There was a lot of protests in 2016, and I recognized that a lot of my favorite hobbies and passions, snowboarding and mountain biking and running, all required protected public lands to really continue. And being in Salt Lake, we have beautiful access to public lands, right, in the Wasatch and the Uinta Range, and I had always taken that for granted. So I think, when Trump was elected, that really lit the fire under me to think, how can I use my skill set as a filmmaker to help share this story and bring greater attention to this issue. And I'll let Galen jump in as well, because I think his motivations may have been different or similar to mine.
Well, I got to be honest. Zeppelin was my roommate at the time. Really sucked on public lands, and we were working together at Wizard Media, which is a company that we run here in Salt Lake City. And in our careers, we really look for stories that build bridges between borders and sort of exist to show us a different side of a coin that we might not be as familiar with. And public lands was honestly a perfect vehicle to do that. And it was an incredible journey to really uncover the different perceived borders in our country. And I think at a time after Trump was elected, it's definitely a motivator for peeling back the curtain and really looking at this issue way more in depth.
Yeah, I think it's all very interesting. In the Zeppelin, I know you're referencing the Bundys in a kind of roundabout way there, which I think is super interesting with that part of Southern Colorado. Which leads me to my second question. I think I really saw y'all's project as it's an often heated conversation that's taking place at the intersection of tradition versus modernity in regards to people who want to see the land used versus those that want the land to be left alone. What lessons did you learn from being in that position of observation while making this film?
I think my own preconceptions around public lands were really challenged. I kind of view myself as an activist in my personal life, and I'm super concerned about climate change and public lands. And I definitely went in with an agenda to this film of thinking, it's just protect and preserve everything. And I think it comes through in the film that our own perceptions shifted while we were in production, that there are so many different people that utilize these lands who have so many different perspectives, and they're all valuable perspectives. For instance, the Red family or the Riveras, their perspective is no less valuable just because they are ranchers or loggers. They are generations deep on these lands. They have so many ties to them, and we need to acknowledge that. We cannot just disregard their stories or push them off the land. I think, so that's what I really learned, is that this is not a black and white issue. There is so much gray, and the only way that we're going to get through this is really listening to one another and moving forward with respect. We don't need the ARs of taking over the Malheur, with the Bundy example.
Yeah.
I'll let Galen add in as well.
No, I mean, I think that you hit on it. That interpretation of being used versus left alone is very I think binary black and white way of thinking that a lot in the environmental community would see as outdated environmentalism. I think it really does come down to respect. That's what we witnessed on the ground. And respect is kind of like love languages. There's a lot of different kinds that exist. And I think that as we like move through the issue of public lands, understanding that respect could look like respect of one's livelihood or respect of one's traditions, different ways of coexisting. And when we've lost respect, we've lost already. And I think that that was really what we lost, what public lands lost during the Trump presidency.
And I think I'll jump in as well. That was what made this film so challenging for us to make was, we set out with clear intentions, and because our intentions were so challenged, we had to really realign of what is the narrative that we want to tell here, who are the proper people to showcase to tell that narrative, making sure that we are showcasing people who rely on public lands for industry and not directly energy, but ranching and logging, and finding those characters, not just profiling environmentalists or people in the outdoor recreation community, but really trying to show people from both sides of the political spectrum and think, can this film be the proverbial olive branch to others who may not agree with us and say, all right, we've all watched this film. Now we can at least have discourse around public lands. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point of view. You're raising some very fascinating points, particularly in a period of time where we're really having a different sort of discourse with the land because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I know the film was released this year with your principal production taking place probably the last year or two, but what has really changed in your regards to access to the land or usage of the land due to COVID-19?
I mean, I think one of the things that, as Zeppelin was saying, we sort of were challenged in our own interpretations was the role of the outdoor industry as it pertains to conservation, public lands management, and often sort of like this willful ignorance around like the impact that outdoor recreation has. And I think that being forced to sort of re-examine our relationship with public lands and really say, like, if we consider this a sacred space, we need to respect that when it comes to something like a pandemic that brings disease and brings, harmful things from the outside world and has an impact on this land and the people on it. And so, at the beginning of the pandemic, I think that certainly reevaluated or made a lot of people reevaluate their relationship with public land.
I think the next step in this conversation, at least from the film perspective, is really how to educate people about recreating responsibly. I actually am starting on a 5-part series of shorts here in Jackson about how to recreate responsibly on our national forest here, because we're experiencing such an influx of tourism, and this is not unique to Jackson. I mean, look, Utah's national parks are a perfect example. Go to Moab, you wouldn't even recognize it from 10 years ago with all the new hotels. Really educating visitors and locals alike. How do we, recreate on these lands and use them now that there are tens of thousands of people using the same trailheads and trying to bag the same peak and take the same photo? It's like even the impact of dogs and all of it. So I think it's education is the next step. First, awareness, so people actually understand the history of their public lands, recognize how novel of an idea they are, what an American, ideal that they really are, and then how can we move forward in educating them to continue to protect and preserve them.
Sure thing. I think again all of that's wonderfully illustrated by the family you have down in San Juan County, where they're ranchers, or they've been long-standing ranchers, but at the same time they also have other uses, as you showed. The daughter was actually kind of rock climbing there at the end. But at the same time, through all of that, they were really being very adamant about, I don't need another level of government management on my lands. But who's to say who is right and wrong in that particular regard? Because it was done with best intention. And we also realize that best intentions don't always work out the way that we've intended. But I mean, when you were down in that part of the state, what did you really feel was the proper use of the land?
Yeah, I'll speak to that because I think Bears Ears, and I can speak for Galen on this, was the most challenging for both of us to really suss out what was our perspective. You know, the Arctic Refuge was very clear. We didn't even give much credence or voice to the other side because our opinion is it does not need to be drilled. But in Bears Ears, you have such conflict there between the recreation community and the, you know, really legacy industry of ranching. And, you know, what does a monument do to ranching? It provides another level of complications to them for, you know, doing any sort of range improvements. And, you know, is there an actual threat of drilling for uranium or gas in Bears Ears? Sure, but it's small, if not minuscule, because the gas is so remote. There's, you know, a fracking boom in West Texas. We don't need that. And you know what is also a potential for impact is, you know, increased tourism. Bears Ears was done to protect and preserve antiquities, you know, at the bequest of 5 tribes, and that's what made Bears Ears so novel and such a big deal. Is these were tribes who, you know, typically do not talk or work collaboratively, and they came together to ask the Obama administration to designate the monument, and that was a first. And I think it's really summed up well at the end of the film is what precedent does this set? If one president can do it, one can undo it. And now we're looking at the Biden administration, who may very well come back in and reestablish the original boundaries of Bears Ears, which is fantastic. But this, you know, flip-flop nature of the designations is does set a really challenging precedent. What if that was done to a national park or anything else?
And Russell, to sort of come back to your question about the day-to-day management too, and like the appropriate use of it, because I think that the monuments and other designations, and there's a lot of bureaucracy in public land management. And something that we saw unique to the experience down in Southern Utah is like a form of collaborative management, where you have more or less like a mediation of sorts, where representatives from those who are ranching, those who are living, those who practice or still hold on to traditional like uses of the land are able to come together and actually create on a either bi-quarterly, quarterly, or annual basis a management plan that works for those specific needs and interests as it relates to, you know, people who are essentially the boots on the ground. And I think like that's it's still hard, it's collaborative, it's not perfect. But the idea of an outside voice coming in and imposing more bureaucracy on top of what is already a complicated local issue is something that is hard to swallow.
Understandably, and again, wonderfully illustrated in the film. I do want to switch gears for a second. We've got a viewer question, and for those of you that are at home, I'm going to look at this monitor that's back behind my laptop here in just a second. So we've got a question from George, and George asks, did you get any government grants to help with the film? And are the governor and the legislature aware of your film?
That's a good question.
No, we didn't get any government grants. The film was funded privately, and there was grant funding for it, and then through private donors. The governor is aware of the film, I believe. You know, he sat for the interview. We haven't notified his office that the film is released, but we probably should send an email, Galen.
Yeah, right on that.
And I do want to encourage to the viewers at home, please submit more questions. We're looking forward to that. This is your opportunity to interact with Zeppelin and Galen here. So what do you feel was the most important thing that you wanted your viewers to leave your film with this evening?
I think for me, it's just the hope that people are able to relate to like a human story on public lands, either one story that they were particularly drawn to or multiple like human experiences on public land that in turn earns like a newfound respect and understanding and knowledge for public lands as a whole.
And I think my goal for the film has changed post-election. Prior to the election, I was running an impact campaign for 2 or 3 months that was all pushing voter registration and get out the vote effort to really vote with public lands in mind. And now that the election is done and we were done, I can't really comment on who we supported to our 501c3 status, but yeah, our goal has shifted, I think, because no matter what administration is in place, whether it's Biden or Trump, we still are going to have public land battles that need people to submit public comment and write their letters to the editors and call their reps and senators. And so I think this film, the goal was to make a timeless film that the themes, will be relevant even in 8 years, even if the administration has changed and the same characters are no longer involved.
A wonderful explanation. That's actually a question I kind of had rolling around, and I saw here that Susan had also asked that. She was saying that you had a very balanced presentation. She was at those protests and was outside the Capitol when Trump was inside, and it made her sad. She also went on to ask, with Trump gone, how will it change? But I feel like you sort of touched on that question. Is there anything else you want to add there as she speaks specifically? Your 501c3 status, of course, being top of mind.
I think the thing I would encourage right now, we're hopeful around Bears Ears, so the reestablishment of the monument boundaries. But there's 30 days of action going on for the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge right now. And it's a really cool campaign. Actually, each day is a specific ask that you can do. For example, one day is writing the banks. The next day is writing insurance agencies to encourage them not to insure potential oil companies who may seek to develop in the Arctic Refuge. The next would be to call certain reps or senators in Alaska, Murkowski or Sullivan. And so it's really clear action items for those of you who may feel inspired to do more, having seen the film. I think it's really easy to be overwhelmed of, oh, what can I do? I've called my reps, I've called my senators, I've donated $20. But we could share that after the film, post-screening, but you could just look it up. It's 30 days of action for the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It's a Google document and a great resource.
Good deal, good deal. We have a question here from Hillary. How long did you work on the film?
So we began production in December of 2016, right when Bears Ears was designated. We were down in Monument Valley at one of the last meetings before Obama designated it, and we finished post-production this summer. So it was 3.5 years of work from pre-production through post.
And in many ways still feels ongoing. I mean, public lands is an incredibly broad subject, as far as the film is concerned, and understanding the different narrative threads. It's a hard decision to make.
Yeah, and I'll echo what Galen said. I think the work really is ongoing, remaining involved in this conversation, supporting film screenings, doing Q&As. It's something that I'll stay involved in for years because I am incredibly passionate about protecting our public lands. And yeah, but a documentary is a long undertaking in a marriage.
While you were doing that undertaking, you spent some time, it seems like, in Indigenous/Native American communities. Have you still kept connections with those communities as they are kind of going through what they're going through with COVID-19 at the moment?
To be honest, I am ashamed that I have not kept a better connection with the Gwich'in. I need to. I think I was just so overwhelmed with distribution of the film and a little burnt from just working on it for so long. I really do need to keep better contact. We Facebook message intermittently, but I mean, we had such a strong connection with them, and that was such an honor to be welcomed into their village and homes. And yeah, need to not let that slip.
It's a difficult thing. I mean, your plate was obviously full, but with the election and the pandemic, I think we've all been feeling the kind of burnout there. So best of luck, and hopefully you can reconnect at some point. But I do have a question here from Jennifer. When the rancher said it feels like a land grab, did you remind them that it is exactly what they did to the natives before them? So why is their claim to mean more than the others?
I like that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think they acknowledge it. There's a line in the film that says, what my grandpa did was essentially come in here, run a bunch of Indians out, and we had free reign. Like, they know their history very well, but it doesn't really change anything in their perspective. Is my takeaway from it all. They view themselves as the current inhabitants and kind of the current power brokers of the area, and they view it as a land grab, taking away land that they really view as theirs. Justice's quote about 300,000 acres is enough for me. It is public lands, but they treat it and run their cattle on it as if it's theirs, because it's been in their family for decades and they're the caretakers of it. But yeah,
And,
there were a lot of times where we just had to kind of not say anything. You can't be too much of a voice behind the camera and making a documentary.
And also, I think, with all love and respect to the Reds, I'm sure they would say this about their friends and families and other ranchers that we've met. That mentality is sort of stuck in the mud. This is mine, and I know what's right for it, and sort of has a ability to be ignorant to like other ways of looking at that. And most importantly, to reckon with the tragic history of like how they came onto that land to begin with and overgrazed on it and had issues with the land, saying, what's the problem here when you're running like 20,000 head of cattle on high desert? And so I think that, what the question is also alluding to is like a mentality that does need to shift, to recognize and reckon with like your own history and relationship with the land that may be different than generations before you.
Sounds fair. I think that's kind of the hallmark of 2020. It's recognition and acknowledgement, and trying to, have the best allyship with authenticity that you can. Perhaps we will be heading that direction in 2021. I've got some more questions here. Tony has asked, what is planned in the future for Wizard, and what is your next film issue? Is what Chris asks.
I'll speak to that in a film I'm working on right now. I am separate from Wizard now, but I'm currently doing a film about body inclusivity in cycling. We'll be coming out with Shimano this spring. It's called All Bodies on Bikes. Follows two women, one from Salt Lake originally, who are really leading this conversation around body size. They, self-identify as fat women and are really taking back that word and owning it and proving that no matter about your body size, you can still be a cyclist and still be an athlete and still get after it. So that's what I'm most excited about.
And at Wizard, we love working in the long form space and in documentaries and series. And we're based out of Salt Lake City, so sports is, very much our language. Public lands was an incredible foray into a whole new world and a whole new discussion as it related to our craft and film. And for future projects, we've done work with the Olympics and continue to work on content that's coming out for the Summer Games, now delayed, as well as some other really exciting projects that are fully immersive in, the way that it all comes together. And I think that that's really what drew me and keeps me engaged with documentary work from the beginning.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll bring this conversation to a close, but anything else, any parting words for our viewers this evening?
I think that is all. I appreciate everyone joining. And if you're feeling inspired to stand up for the Arctic Refuge, I would encourage you to look up the 30 Days of Action for ANWR. And yeah, have a great night. Thank you so much.
And I come back to the message of 2020 and the film, and I think it boils down to respect, and really respect the opportunity and admire the opportunity to speak with you all and share the film. And hopefully there's something out of the film that you can take away that gives you a newfound respect for something or someone that you otherwise wouldn't have initially thought of coming into this.
Excellent. Let's keep the conversation going. And we actually do have one last question from Susan. First, a quick comment. She loved the film, but she wants to ask, how can people see it from this point forward?
Yeah, so if you visit thegroundbetweenus.com right now, there's a link to purchase the film online on the website.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. That's it. Zeppelin, Galen, thank you. And to everyone else this evening, thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.